I'd like you to watch that video again, the commercial. I think it's nicer with the sound. So we'll just get it back for a second. The sound effects. I was telling someone at the break that we ingrained the GPS process there again and again until it gets stamped on you. Don't forget. All right, welcome back to today's second half of the MPowerBreakfast estate planning. By way of introduction, I'm just going to slip into this by telling you a story. On Thursday night, we had a guest in our house. A friend of ours who goes to a United Church said that she came across this Muslim guy. Suzanne used to work at a daycare for graduate students, Peter Greenhall, and building mainly graduate students there. And this individual is a PhD student, just got his PhD in information technology. And he had a lot of questions about life itself. And the reason for that is because 2 or 3 years ago, his 5-year-old son died of a brain tumor, and this is one of the reasons why he had come here. And shortly after that, and he's a Muslim, he comes from Pakistan, his another kid died, in that building, and he was just taken aback by how different people have a different perspective on life, how they went about the burial and whatnot, and how he did it as a Muslim, and he had questions. And our friend, who's from the United Church, didn't have very many answers, and so she invited him to our place. So when he came that night, the first, we were having coffee and dessert, and the first half hour, 45 minutes, he just talked about himself and where he had been and what he's doing here. And he's a very smart guy, for somebody who's been 2, 3 masters, now a PhD, and and the things that he's done, crazy stuff. And then we slipped into the discussion itself, and then I let him talk, and he was saying that one of the reasons I came in, I'm just wondering, is that I have an open mind as to how people deal with life, right? He's questioning, he's really a seeker, right? And after I've heard him speak, and he was telling the story, and being a technical guy, he was on the computer, he could show, because the Kids Wish Foundation brought the parent, the 5-year-old Atil, just before he died. They asked him, do you have a Wish Foundation? He said he wanted to see his grandparents, both maternal and paternal. And so the Wish Foundation on ATV, they had a clip where they brought the parents in, to fulfill his wish. And the kid died after that, about 6, 7 surgeries, and the final one, his lungs collapsed and he died. Anyways, when we slipped into this, and I listened to him, and I knew that he was looking for comfort, closure, trying to make sense of everything. So I told him 2 stories. The first one I said, I'm just going to share something with you that's come to me right now. I did the first one, and it was funny because that morning itself, in the car, Suzanne had a day off. And one of the things that I've started doing lately is memorizing scripture in chunks. Yeah? I have a goal to memorize a lot of the Psalms. And that I've memorized Psalm 139, and of course I'm getting older and my memory is slipping, so I got to practice and practice. So that day in the car, as I was driving Suzanne, I said, do you mind if I practice Psalm 139 with you? And it goes like this. In Psalm 139, there's 24 verses. But if you take the 13th verse to the 16th verse, it goes like this. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. And this is verse 15. And I like verse 15 from the Message, which goes like this. You know me inside out. You know every bone in my body. You know exactly how I was made, bit by bit, how I was sculptured from nothing into something. Okay? And in verse 16, coming back to the NIV, goes like this. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to me. So I turned to this gentleman and I said to him, okay, God knew, okay, that Atib was only going to live so long. Okay? This was his purpose. He already ordained it. Okay? Then I said, let me tell you another story. I said, this God that we serve, who ordained our days even before we come here. Okay? Let me tell you another one. I said, you know, God chose a people, the Israelites, a group of people, to be his, holy to him. And they disobeyed him. And somewhere along the way, about 3,000 years ago, this people, after one king, after Solomon, the kingdom divided into Israel and Judah, right? And in Judah, they had their own kings, and one king after another, a king would come, and, you know, he would follow the forefathers. Another one would come, follow the foreign gods, okay? And this went on until they came to a king by the name of Hezekiah. And as soon as Hezekiah took the kingship of Judah, guess what he did? He opened the temple, he cleaned up the temple, restored all the priests, okay? Knowing that, you know, the people before him didn't obey. Okay? And so throughout life, King Hezekiah followed the law, okay? Restored everything, you know, in accordance with God. And one day he became sick. In Isaiah 38, he became sick, and the prophet Isaiah and the kings of Judah and Israel too, you know, they always consulted with the prophets. Okay? They don't go to war, they don't make, you know, strategic moves without consulting with the prophets. So Isaiah was the prophet who was advising Hezekiah. And Isaiah came, and Isaiah told Hezekiah, which leads into today's topic of estate planning. He says, you're not going to recover from this boils. Okay? He says, get your house in order, because the Lord has decided that you're going to die from this. And as Isaiah left, and he was just in the outer courts, right? Hezekiah turned to the wall and he started crying. Okay? And he said to God, he said, remember, he says, I walked faithfully with you. I did everything that you asked me to do. Okay? And as Isaiah was just in the outer courts, the word of the Lord came to Isaiah, go back and tell him I'm going to give him 15 more years. Isaiah 38:5. God gave Hezekiah, extended his life 15 more years. Okay? So again, I turned to my friend, I said, the same God who determines what our days are going to be on a whim can extend your life by 15 years. Okay? Like we are all in his hands. And I said, I hope it gives you some comfort in knowing that. And then somewhere towards the end of the evening, we told him that because Atib couldn't make the choice, you know, to accept Christ, to know Christ, right? As far as we are concerned, he is in heaven. Okay? Because even when the Lord was here, he says, you know, the angels behold the face of my Father. You remember? All right, so just by way of that, so the reason why I bring that up is because what Isaiah told Hezekiah, okay, he said, you're not going to recover from this, put your house in order, which is the topic of today, which is what estate planning is, right? So with that, let me just come into today's topic, which is estate planning, and this is how we are going to do this. We're going to talk about, in the context of what is estate planning, why we have to do this, and how we're going to go about it, okay? And I'm going to also talk about three kinds of estate planning, which is our topic, which is basic, advanced, and eternal, right? So the what, how, what, why, and how, there are, the what and how can be, the what and the why is common to basic and advanced, okay? But the how is different for each one, because, you know, how you do it basically, how you do it for the advanced, and how you do it eternal is different. And the why is also different for the eternal estate planning, Okay? So I hope what I'm saying is clear here. So what I'm saying is the what and the why is common to basic and advanced. Okay? The how is different for each one of them, but the why is also distinct for eternal planning, eternal estate planning, and I'll get into that. All right, so what is estate planning? It is the distribution of your assets and liability at death in a proper and effective manner. So let me just take some of those words there and throw some light on it. So when one dies, if you pass on, what happens to everything that's in your name, property that's in your name, assets that are in your name? If you don't estate plan, then these assets, and not only assets but liabilities, okay? Because the people to whom you owe money, they also know that they have to collect this now because you stop to exist. Okay? So if we don't do this, then it's not going to be done in a proper in the sense of how you would have liked it. Okay? Because otherwise somebody else will dictate this. It may not be the way that you wanted it. Okay? And effective because again, you'll see this, it'll become very apparent. There are tax liabilities that are created at death. Okay? Many people are not aware of this. Okay? And it's always a surprise to the people who are left over, who are picking up the pieces, okay? Or tying up all the loose ends. So what estate planning really is, the event that triggers this is death. Okay? When you stop to exist, in the land of the living, and your assets, your liabilities have to be distributed and transferred, and you estate plan because you want to do it in a proper way, okay? The way that you would have it. Okay? You decide who gets what and that kind of thing. And effective in the sense of minimizing fees and taxes. Okay? We'll see where that comes in. Otherwise, a lot of that is eaten up by fees and taxes. All right? Okay, so why estate plan? Because if you don't, then the law decides it. When someone dies, an entity is created. Okay? It's called your estate. Okay? You are Tom Rousel. When Tom Rousel dies, Tom Rousel doesn't exist anymore as a person. So the entity that's created is the estate of Tom Rousel. Okay? So that's what we deal with. It's almost like a corporation. Okay? It's an unnatural entity, right? And so what happens is if you don't stipulate in a will how you want things distributed, okay, or transferred, guess what? The law decides. The provincial laws decide. And where the provincial it's a provincial jurisdiction, and the law that governs it is called the Intestate Succession Act in Nova Scotia. Okay? So when you go see a lawyer, they'll just go through that, and depending on who's left behind, typically it goes like this. If you have a spouse, 50% goes to your spouse, and if you have kids, the other 50% is distributed equally between the kids. In most places it's like that. I guess there's slight differences. And then, if there's no spouse, no kids, then they're looking at the next of kin, extended family. They're looking for siblings, cousins, anybody, okay? That they can, and if there's just absolutely nobody, then it goes to the state. Okay? The state takes over. They appoint someone to liquidate it. All right. So the law decides, and this is why you have to do it, because otherwise, it's not going to be done the way you want it to. Now, the other thing that happens is there are taxes. Here, where the law decides, the other thing that comes in, I'm wondering if I put it, probably forget. The next one's probably fees, okay? That law, when you do one of the things, even if you had a will, right, the will has to be proved, okay? So if, let's say you die and you've got a will, and in your will you've stipulated exactly how you want your assets and liabilities to be handled, that will still has to be what's called probated, okay? That means that we have to go to the province and authenticate that will. And the reason for that is because if someone dies and you find a will and you go to the bank and say, oh, according to this will, everything is left to me, So transfer all the money to me, to my account, and the bank does it, okay? And then 1 week later, your kids come along and say, hey, there's another will, Dad left it with the lawyer, right? And so if the institution had released the funds, now they're liable, okay? And for that reason, they will not deal with just a will, they want a probated will, okay? Where you go to the municipality, they do their due diligence, okay? They make sure that there's no other wills, this is the last will, right? And they will rubber stamp. They'll put a stamp on it saying that this is probated, and then when you take it to the institutions, they will release funds based on that, okay? And guess what? For that privilege of for probating your will or proving your will, they will charge anywhere an average of 1.6% of the amount of the estate, okay? And that can be substantial. If your principal resident is going, you can sell your house, you know, one spouse dies, the other spouse is still living in that house, right? But settling the estate, guess what goes into the estate? All of the assets, 1/2 of the house was in the name of that spouse, right? So it goes into the estate. That's a big chunk of money. That spouse may have RSPs, you know, pensions from employers, whatnot. All of that goes in. By the time you keep adding it all up, it can be a substantial amount, okay? And 1.6% of that is quite a chunk of money to be giving away, okay? So we got to find ways around that, all right? So that's that. Now what I've got here is the provincial, pass this around, I printed up for you, the provincial probate fees rate. And you'll notice that Nova Scotia has got one of the highest, okay? Now if you know, for people who've got very small estates, $10,000 is not a big deal, but most people don't have that. They've got equity in the house, they've got RSPs, they've got pensions, they've got investments, and if you're going through the GPS process, you've got substantial assets at the end of the game, okay? At the end of time, you know, this is why we need to preserve and protect those. All right? Now, in addition to probate fees and what the law would decide would happen to your assets and liabilities, the other issue that comes into the mix are taxes. Income taxes and capital gains taxes. So, again, let's use an example. You know, this is October the 19th, okay? I died today. One of the things that's going to happen as far as my estate is concerned, the settlement of my estate is, an income tax has to be filed for me, a final income tax, okay? It's, the deadline for that is 6 months after death, or April 30th, whichever comes last. Okay, they give you 6 months after death or April 30th, okay, whichever comes last, the latter of those two. Whoever the executor of the estate is has to file a final income tax return. So let's say I died today. So my executor will have to compute my income from various sources, you know, however I normally get my income. If I'm an employee, right, they'll check with my employer, get the latest T4, right? And the first thing that, you know, gets reported on my final tax return is my income for the year, okay? Now this is the second thing that, you know, a lot of people are not aware of, is capital gains. So let's say I have a cottage, and let's say I have a rental property, and let's say, you know, using the strategies that we use, I open a discount brokerage account using Roone1 strategy. I've got a stock account, okay? I've got a discount brokerage account where I'm buying 5 to 10 stocks using the Roone1 strategy as per the GPS process. And then I die. As far as the government is concerned, okay, they are going to take the values of all of my assets 1 day before I die. So if I die on the 19th, whatever is public, okay, for instance, if real estate, if I have a rental property, all they're going to do is, what's the address of your rental property? Okay, and I'm going to say, you know, just pick an address in Halifax. They're going to call up 3 realtors, right? And there are people, faithful government employees, paid full time to do this, and get comparables, okay? And come up with an average market value of a similar property, and say, you died on the 19th, on the 18th, this was the value of the market value of your property, right? And let's say that market value was, I'm going to put a number here, 300,000. And then they're going to say, you know, this is a rental property, and you bought it for 10 years ago for 100,000. So 200,000 is a capital gain, right? Capital gains are 50% taxable. So 100,000 is taxable. So let's say from the 1st to the 18th, income-wise, I made 100,000. Now they're going to say, oh, this one property, you had a $200,000 capital gain. 50% of that 100 is taxable. 100 gets added to my tax return. So now I'm already at 200,000. I have 100,000 income to report, 100,000 there. Did I sell the property? No, it was deemed disposed. Deemed disposed at fair market value. Then they're going to go to my stock account. They're going to call up my discount brokerage, and they're going to say, okay, what, we are the government, and tell us what his stock value was on the 18th. Okay? And they'll tell him what the market value was. Then they're going to say, what was his cost base? How much did he pay for it? That's just an example. I put $100,000 in there. It's worth $300,000 on the 18th, one day before I die. Same idea. You're going to say, okay, $200,000 gain. 50% of that is taxable capital gain. Executor, please put in another $100,000. You see how the bill adds up? Okay. So by the time the executor settles the estate, that's in between the income, that's a huge tax bill to be paid there. Now you might sit there and say, oh, this doesn't apply to me. I'm just middle income, ordinary guy. Not true. Yeah, I'll tell you what. If you are a middle income, ordinary person, chances are this is how this is going to play out. Okay. By the time you are in your 60s, I'm just going to use 60s, okay, and you've been fairly financially responsible, especially if you follow the GPS process, you stayed away from debt, and you started investing, you've got emergency funds and all of that. Chances are by the time you are in your 60s, you would have anywhere from minimum, I'm going to use a minimum amount, $250,000 in RSPs. Okay? You will have more if you're, if you're more diligent in what you do because of the way we structure it. But let's say minimum, okay, $250,000 just in RSP. Your house is paid for, you have no debts, and you've got $250,000 in RSPs. Okay? And your spouse is gone, and you are left. Now you've got $250,000. And the day you die, there was only $250,000. Let's take my case. I died on the 19th day, and I have $200,000 left in my RSPs. Okay? As far as the government is concerned, one day before, on the 18th, this was deemed disposed. Right? So guess what? It's as though I've cashed in my $250,000 of RSPs. So take my case here. I've got a rental property. I've got income for that year right up to the 18th. They dinged me for $100,000, which I have to report. Then they said your rental property is deemed disposed, $100,000. Okay. Your non-registered stock account, $100,000. I'm already up to $300,000, right? Now they come to my RSPs, okay? I haven't done anything. They're all sitting wherever they're sitting invested, okay? But they're deemed disposed, okay? One day before death. You follow? So $250,000 of RSPs gets put in there, okay? So many times when we go to funerals, and I've been doing this for 29 years, so every so often I get this phone call. Mom or dad is in palliative care, okay? Things are looking very bad. So I tell them, okay, I'm very sorry about all of this. And they usually ask me what needs to be done. I say nothing needs to be done. Wait until the funeral is over. I'll show up for the funeral, and all I need from you is a death certificate, okay, from the funeral house. After that, it's just a matter of signing papers, all that. Within 10 to 20 days, I come back with a check, right? And many times these kids, they think that there's insurance money coming in, and there's all. And when I tell them that there's going to be a big tax bill, they're all surprised. But nobody ever told us. And especially when there's a cottage involved. Okay? The chances of the cottage was bought 20, 30 years ago, and cottage country values have gone up like crazy because of the baby boomers. There's a demand for it, right? But that's a capital gain. That's not principal residence. Okay? Because the only place where real estate property where you do not pay tax on the gains is in your principal residence. Okay? That portion. But if you have a cottage, all of that is capital gains. Okay? And so, if you pay $10,000 for the cottage and over the years you put in another 20 in renovations and whatnot, so adjusted cost base is $30,000, and if it's worth $300,000, $270 is a capital gain. Okay? Unless, there are ways around it. You can designate the cottage as your principal residence. You can make the case that you spend 50% of your time there. You can make the case. Okay? But when you do that, then when you sell your principal residence during that portion, you can, there's no double bidding. But you have to sort of weigh where the gain is the most, okay? So my point is that here's why we have to estate plan. Number one, if you don't estate plan, then the law decides how your assets and liabilities are being handled. Okay? It may not be the way that you want it. And second, all of these fees and taxes, encroach on you. All right? So this is why we estate plan. So what and why? Now let's talk about how. Okay, so as I said, there are 3 kinds of estate planning in my mind. The first is very basic estate planning, which everybody should have. Everybody should do this, okay, because it's very doable and it affects us. If all of us have got, however minimal or however large the asset base is, we all have assets, okay? Or even mementos that, that mean something to us that we might want to leave to someone in particular. I always had this, when I was young, I used to collect sayings, nice sayings, and I've got notebooks. One of them going back to 1974. I'll go to a bookshop, if I like something, I don't have the money, I'll just copy it. Like a poem or something, but it's terrific. They're collected over the years. So what, right? And sometimes the book, the store owner doesn't like it, but anyways, I've kept them. I've always had this wish to give it to someone to whom these things mean something. So I wouldn't want it to just be thrown out or give it to someone who likes similar things, right? So it's that kind of idea. So everybody should have basic estate planning because it'll, distribute your assets and handle your liabilities the way you intended it, at least, okay? And the way that it's done is through will, through a power of attorney, and through a personal directive. Personal directive used to be called living will. So a will, basically, you go and see a lawyer. You can do a holograph will, but in order to avoid financial headaches legally, okay, it's always better to do a notarized legal lawyer will, right? Because then you're not off-site. Okay? You don't want to don't want the thing to be held up. Okay? You go see the lawyer, and that's what they're trained to do, and they'll do a will for you. The other thing that you want to do when you're there, while you're there, estate planning has to do with death. But if you're going to be doing this while you see the lawyer to do the will for the estate planning, do also a power of attorney, which basically says that if you're physically or mentally incapable of making decisions, okay, you appoint so-and-so to do this. Okay? This just saves whoever who's going to step in that role anyways a lot of financial headaches, legal headaches. Okay? Because if there's no power of attorney, who could be the spouse, they're not going to budge. Okay? Because your spouse is a separate entity from you. You follow? And they're not going, just like now, if I call an insurance company to get information on Suzanne, they won't give it to me for privacy reasons. They'll say, call Suzanne on the phone, right? So it avoids that when you have a power of attorney that says, look, he or she is physically or mentally incapable, and here's a legal document that says that I have the right to do this, okay? And that just opens up doors. Saves you a lot of it. Versus having to do that in the aftermath. Lawyers would love that. That's when they make their money, okay? They'll just tell you, oh, there's so many things to clean up, it's going to take this, it's going to take that, and there you go. You're writing checks to them, all right? So make sure there's a power of attorney. The personal directive used to be called the living will, okay? They changed it in Nova Scotia to a personal directive. That's basically to address a tawny issue. The tawny issue is this: whether or not you want to be kept alive on machines, okay? Usually when the time comes, nobody wants to play God, okay? And your spouse or your loved ones around them, and they love you, they don't want you to go, okay? And they don't want to play God, right? So the personal directive addresses that, okay? You make that decision while you have a sound mind, okay? And if you make that decision that you don't want to be, kept alive by machines, when the time comes, just give the personal directive to the doctors. They'll know what to do. Okay? Because once they see the personal directive, they see your wishes, whether you want it to be sustained or whether you don't want to be sustained. Okay? What's funny is when Suzanne and I went to do this, Suzanne is a bit... anyways, we went to the lawyer and we said, personal directive. So I said, look, if I'm dead, brain dead, I don't want to take the things off. And Suzanne said, but I want 2-3 lawyers' opinions. I want 2-3 doctors to confirm. She said, I want a third doctor to confirm. She cannot pull the plug on me just like that. The lawyer raised his eyebrows. Sure, we'll get her a third doctor to confirm. All right, so basic estate planning, everybody should do this. If you go and see a lawyer, if you shop around, and I've done this for clients, an average lawyer, there are lawyers who charge a lot, but for about $200 per person. Okay? So for a couple, it's going to cost you about $400. the lawyer would come to you, or you would go to the lawyer first meeting. You would sit down and basically lay it out, saying that, this happens, if I die, I want everything to go to my wife, and if we die in a common disaster, this is how we want it distributed. Just spell it out, okay? And he'll prod you or she'll prod you. And once they've got a sense of how to draft the documents, they'll go and draft the documents. They'll set up a second meeting where you have to come in, and another lawyer would witness it. So now you've got solid documents, right? And like I said, the average price is about $200 per person. So per couple, $400. The only time you have to revise these are when there are major changes in your life. Okay? And at that time you add a codicil. Just call up the lawyer and say, look, there's a major change here. Do we need to change anything? Okay? Usually the will, right? And you make those changes at that time, and then codicil is it, and then you are on track. Okay? Now, if there are major changes in the law itself, the lawyer's office should be calling you to tell you what needs to be done to change it, as when we change from the living will to the personal directive. All right? So, in basic estate planning, and it applies to everyone, you should do this. This is as basic as it gets. If you don't have a will, a power of attorney, and a personal directive, then you need to go do this ASAP. Just call up a lawyer. If you don't have one, get in touch with April, Rose, or me. We'll put you in touch with somebody who will do it for about $200 per person. All right? Okay, and if you haven't done one, if your will and power of attorney and your personal directive is very old, okay, it bears doing it, updating it. Okay? Just make sure that everything is up to speed. Okay, at estate planning advanced. So that's basic estate planning. So now let's complicate things a bit, okay? Let's do some maneuvering so that we avoid... the will basically would specify how you want your assets and your liabilities to be transferred and to be handled, right? But advanced estate planning is when now we manipulate things so that we pay the least amount of probate fees and the least amount of income taxes, okay? And there are ways to do it. So here are some ways. So the first one is to make sure that you have joint and last survivor accounts. If everything is in Tom's name, Debbie's going to have a problem when she's trying to get money out of Tom's bank. But if it's a joint and last survivor account, automatically whoever the last survivor has access to it. Okay? Very simple step to do. Instead of making a single account, joint and last survivor. Right? The other thing you could do is, as far as possible, if, especially life, certain things can flow outside of the estate directly to the beneficiary. Life insurance is a classic example, right? So make sure that on all your life insurance policies, you are naming a named beneficiary. Because if there is no named beneficiary, by default it goes to the estate, okay? And if you've got 100, 200, $500,000, $1 million going into the estate, 1.6%, $15,000 is going to probate fees, okay? Whereas if you name a beneficiary, it goes directly to the beneficiary. It doesn't go into the estate. Okay? So you've avoided $15,000. If it's a $1 million policy, that's it. All right? The other one where you can name a beneficiary is RSPs. You can make sure that if you have individual or group RSPs, always make sure that you have named someone as a beneficiary. Okay? And so there's a rollover provision at death. Okay? Now, in the case of a spouse, there's no tax implications, but in the case of somebody else, there will be tax implications. All right? But name a beneficiary. If you have a company, if you are a business owner, and I'm not sure any of you are, but if you are a business owner, if you're planning to have a business later on, there's something called an estate freeze, okay, where you freeze the estate, and this is how this goes. So let's say I have a company, Roone Financial Group is my company, and I started Roone Financial Group in 2002, and today it's 2013, so we're 11 years out. And let's say when I started my company, I put in $50,000 in my company, okay? And let's say the company is worth $1 million today, okay? So when and if, and when you start a business, at some point you have to hang up your shoes. You have to retire and move on. And when you sell that company, same thing, it's a property, right? So there's capital gains involved. Okay? So one way a lot of business owners, by the time they get the business going, they're already in their 50s, a bit later on in life, And they have no intention of retiring, especially when that's their passion. Okay? And they've been successful at it. They just want to keep going it as long as possible. But at some point, you know, they have to go. So what we encourage them to do is an estate freeze. So what we do is this. We say, okay, you started the company with $50,000. It is worth $1 million today. That's $950,000 of gain. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to set up another company, and we're going to roll this company into that company. Okay? So your gains are frozen at this $950. Anything, so that company's asset cost base now starts at $950. You follow? And the owners of that company, you can name whoever you want. Okay? Children or whatever, right? But not you. Okay? And so that new company will give you back a promissory note for $950,000 because you sold it to them for $950,000. You moved it in there, right? It is this $950,000 that you deal with the capital gains. Okay? You've frozen it there. So let's say another 10 years go by, I'm still living. Company's now worth $2 million, right? That second $1 million is in that new company, not from, mine is frozen at $950. You follow? That's how we freeze business owners' estates. We freeze the estate so that future growth is accrued to somebody else in a different entity. Okay? Make sense? So that's how we do it. That's another way of doing it. Very simply, basically, there's more to it than that, but in a nutshell, that's what it is. We freeze your growth so that future growth is accrued to somebody else. All right? The other way to do it is through this instrument called a trust. Okay? And there are different kinds of trust, but the whole idea of a trust again is you are transferring ownership to the trust. There's a difference between ownership and control. Okay? So if I move everything into a trust, okay, into a trust, the trust has to have a trustee. There are three parties to a trust. There is the guy who sets up the trust, who's called the I forget the name now. And then there's a beneficiary, and then there's trustees. What do they call them? The one who starts the trust. He's just a nominal role. And then you've got the settler. Sorry, the settler of the trust is one person who gets the trust going by throwing in $1 to open the trust. Okay. And then you've got the trustees who control the trust. And then you've got the beneficiaries who are going to benefit from the assets of the trust. Okay? So if I move an asset into the trust, I've taken the ownership and I've given it to the trust, but I haven't given up control because I'll make myself the trustee. Now I control, right? I don't own, but I control it. Nothing happens to those assets until I say where it goes. Okay? So if I say, you know, my children are to be the beneficiary, right? I'll name my son as the beneficiary, then that's where it goes. Okay? So there are many kinds of trusts. So without getting too complicated, I'll just mention a few here. The first one is the inter vivos trust, where you're making this trust in your will. Your Tom might say something like, when I die, I don't trust Debbie to manage my money, so I want you to set up a trust, a spousal trust, and everything is going to go into the spousal trust, and trustee is going to be Joel. And Joel is going to be deciding what Debbie gets. Something like that, you know, where you're controlling. You know, you're manipulating, you're controlling, where, for various reasons, okay? You might have children who are young, kids who are irresponsible, who haven't done well, and you're afraid to put huge chunks of money, they'll just blow it. Okay? And trustees could also be, even executors in the will, could be corporate executors. If you don't have somebody who's competent, you know, if no one can, you know, wants to step into that role, Bank of Montreal, you know, there are corporate trustees. They'll take 5% of the estate, but they'll, you know, it's like a third party. Okay? They'll just come in, manage everything according to your will, and give an accounting of everything, but they charge a fee for that, right? But it's arm's length. Okay? There's no emotions involved in what they do. Similarly with trustees, you can have corporate trustees if you cannot find people who want to do it or competent enough to do it. All right? So an inter vivos trust is when, while you're living, in your will, you set up all this trust. So they come into existence at death. As soon as you die, whoever reads your will, the lawyer reads the will, says a spousal trust has to be set up. So he sets up a spousal trust. And you might say in your will, all the life insurance money is to go into the spousal trust. Voila. So she sets up a trust, Debbie Rousel Spousal Trust. Okay? And every year that becomes a separate entity, like a corporation. You have to file a tax return and do an accounting and all that. Okay? The next one is a testamentary trust, which comes into play when you die. Okay? It kicks in when you die. Okay? The trust is created when you die. You follow? The first one is done while you're living. The second one is you specify in your will. I'm trying to see how it would be different. The testamentary one is created when you die, and the interviews one is created while you're living. Okay? So the discretionary and family trust would be ones while you're still living. Okay? You make this trust. There's a lot of, especially when you have a lot of assets. Okay? It makes sense to have trust because each trust, a tax return is filed for each trust. So each trust has its own deductions. So you can double up on the personal deductions. So if Debbie, if we create a spousal trust for Debbie, and in that year, there's 2 taxes that are going to be filed. Okay? So the income that comes out that Debbie gets will be taxed in her name, but the income that remains in the trust will be taxed in the trust. So you sort of split income. You can have many like this, and this is one of the reasons why they do this. Yeah? The discretionary trust basically said, you spell out the discretionary powers that are given to the trustees, okay, as to what they can or cannot do, right? And finally, a family trust, which is very popular, especially amongst professionals and people who make 6-figure income, is to split income. Okay? Basically, a lot of people when they, I'll take the example of doctors because I'm familiar with that. When a doctor graduates or when they set up practice, chances are they don't do everything in their own personal name. They set up, Dr. Bob Polstra, and the corporation is called Dr. Bob Polstra Inc., right? And the way they usually do it is like that. It could be, but if they wanted to do advanced estate planning, typically if they set up a corporation called Dr. Bob Polstra, he might own all the shares, or he and his spouse might own the shares, or he or his spouse and his kids might own the shares. But the problem with doing that is if you own shares of a company, if you own the company, it's liability. Okay? If somebody turns around and sues, they're going to sue the owners of the company. You follow? So another way around that is to not be the owner, to limit your liability, and the way you do it is you set up a family trust. You make the family trust the owner of the company. Okay? So you don't own the company, so because you don't own the company, they can't sue you. Right? But you control the company because you control the trust. Big difference. You don't own it, but you control it. Okay? So Dr. Bob Polstra, instead of owning the common shares of the company, he sets up a family trust called the Polstra Family Trust. Okay? And the Polstra Family Trust now owns Dr. Bob Polstra shares. Right? So now the family trust controls the corporation, but it doesn't own it. Okay? So they take monies out of, instead of leaving monies in Dr. Bob Polstra, Dr. Bob Polstra makes $500,000, and after he pays taxes and his expenses and his taxes, he's still got $250,000 left. Okay? If he had just set it up as Dr. Bob Polstra and left the $250,000 there, and one of his patients turns around and sues him and wins, they're going to come after all of his assets, okay? And they're going to say that belongs to you. So they're going to take that money, that $250,000, right? Whereas if he had set up a family trust, he takes that $250,000 and he flows it into the family trust, yeah? Because he has dividends to the family trust, and from the family trust he can distribute it to whoever he wants, split this as much as he wants. So just to bring a personal example in here, in 2002 I set up a family trust, the Singh Family Trust. And when my kids were going to school, to help them out for education as opposed to taking student loans, we just flowed money from Roone Financial Group into the family trust to the kids. Okay? So if they need $10,000 for that year, right? I just took $10,000 out of the company, from the company, Roone Financial Group, make a check to the Singh Family Trust, because me and my children and grandchildren yet unborn are named as beneficiaries. Okay? As long as they qualify those titles, they can get the... So when I take out $10,000 out of the company, put it into the family trust account, from the family trust account, cut a check to my son or my daughter, right? That year, my son or my daughter has to report that $10,000. But when you're a student, okay, you know, we report $10,000. There's the personal deductions, you know. So it's a way to split income. Okay? So this is why people do it. So when you do this and you set up these trusts in your estate planning, this is when you get to minimize the probate fees, and you get to eliminate, even possibly, the capital gains taxes. Okay? And you know, these are substantial amounts of money that we're talking about. But if you don't plan, if you don't do this, then at the last minute it's too late. Okay? You have to face the music. You have to pay these bills. Right? Even this, you know, this business of having a will. Okay? If you don't have a will, imagine going to a lawyer and saying to them, "There's no will. Now what do we do?" You know, the guy's meter is just running. Okay? Where it was going to cost you $200 just to do this, now it's going to cost you 5, 6, 7 times that. All right? Okay, so advanced estate planning, this is how you do it. So let's come to eternal estate planning. This is what makes us different. Okay? Roone153 Financial Advisors is a ministry with a mandate to empower the body of Christ. Okay? So our mandate is a bit different from what, you know, other financial advisors do. So you'll never hear this from any other financial advisor. Okay? We have, remember when April Rose was doing the GPS process, and she put up the definition of the GPS process: unique, biblically based financial plan to do 3 things. 1 is to avoid financial hardships, attain financial freedom, and 3rd is to build eternal treasures. Yeah? So this is where this comes in. So why do we have to plan eternally? So let's take a look. Some of the compelling reasons. In the Bible, biblical lifespans, if you go to Genesis 6 verse 3, it says this: God said that, you know, I'm not going to put up with man, you know, forever. He said, every inclination of your heart is to sin. So he says, going forward, mankind is only going to live for 120 years. Okay? So this is the first indication of a biblical lifespan, 120 years. And then from that point on, really, you know, lifespans were out about there. Okay? If you read going forward from that point, nobody lived like Methuselah, 969 years. Okay? All it came down to about there. Joseph, I believe, was 110. You know, most of them were around there, right? Then in Psalm 90:12, Moses, who wrote Psalm 90:12, said, you know, the average lifespan of a man is 70. And if you have strength, maybe 10 years more, 80, 70. And if you are healthy, if you have strength, maybe 80. So biblically, lifespans are put between 70, 80 to 120, right? Now, peculiar to where you are living in the world, in Canada, the average lifespan is about 85 years. In Uganda, I read somewhere, the average lifespan, because of malaria and AIDS, is 54. Okay? 54 years old, average lifespan. Okay? But in Canada, we're blessed, you know, because of the privileges we have and the quality of life that we have, 85 years. So let's put this in perspective. Okay? Why do we have to plan eternally? It's because take 85 years and use eternity as a backdrop. Okay? It is a sliver of eternity. So why are we acting like this is the end-all and the be-all? You know? We live as though this really matters. It shouldn't. Okay? In light of eternity, this 85 years, and by the time you just get going, 25 years has gone by. You just start finding your footing. You've really got 65 years left. On the back end, depending on what you did, you know, during that time, you might be spending your time just, you know, just keeping alive, okay, because of health reasons. So in my mind, really, you've only got about 40, 50 years. Okay? So use that as a backdrop of eternity and ask yourself, does this really matter? Okay? You know, and if you look at it that way, this is why you want to be building eternal treasures, because whatever you build here, you're not, it's not going to last. Yet, I'm guilty of this myself, okay? And I don't want to point fingers at others, I'll just speak for myself. We say with our mouth, okay, that, with our minds we believe this, we say this with our mouth, but our actions betray us. Okay? Because we are still chasing earthly treasures, trinkets, and trophies. Okay? Given the choice. Okay? I'm trying to change that, which is one of the reasons why I have cut out all of my reading, and I've given up a lot of magazines, and because I find that I've got so much time left, and I really need to get into the Word of God, because I haven't given it its due attention. People spend more time on Facebook, on social media, but they'll spend 15 minutes reading the Bible. Something is wrong with that picture. If you really believe this is the living Word of God, how can that imbalance come, right?